Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure, again, rather redundantly, on behalf of Chapman Tripp, to welcome to the conference's, to welcome you to the conference's second preliminary session, and my privilege to introduce the Leader of the Opposition, Chris Luxon. We're privileged to hear firsthand from him on his party's policy intentions if they get elected on the 14th of October, and what they will be doing to get New Zealand back on track. Of National's headline list, cutting red tape, driving innovation, building infrastructure and encouraging investment are likely to be popular with this audience. Allowing the under-30s to make KiwiSaver withdrawals to meet their rental bonds, maybe not so much, but I understand that Chris is going to be making some important other policy announcements today, and I look forward to those. We'll be keen to hear more detail on National Party's plans for the insurance, banking, financial advisory and retirement savings sectors. Personally, I'd like to hear more about initiatives to teach financial literacy in schools and how the National Party plans to facilitate other improvements to the financial services sector. Chapman Tripp is proud to sponsor this event. Thanks to Chris Luxon for joining us. I'll now hand over to the Leader of the Opposition, Chris Luxon.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. Good to see you, buddy. Well, kia ora. Good morning, everybody. It is a real pleasure to be here. Can I say thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the work that you do in such an important sector for New Zealand. Can I say, Tim, thank you for the invitation and the introduction, and can I also acknowledge Rachel Smaley, who's done some outstanding work in advocacy around Farmac, and I want to thank her for that work as well. And can I also acknowledge Rob Flanagan and Richard Clippen from the Financial Services Council. Thank you for your leadership and the association and what you do. And also Andrew Bailey, who you've probably already heard from already over the last few days. Thank you, Andrew, for being such a great champion for this sector and for consumer and commerce in general. Now, look, I think this is the most difficult period and moment for New Zealand's economy since the global financial crisis, and arguably since well before that. And it's clear to me that families are going backwards. Real wages have experienced their most significant period of decline since records began, with inflation outstripping wages now for 3 years in a row. Food prices are up 30% in 6 years, and rents are up an average of $175 a week. And a family looking to refix their mortgage today will face an additional $700 a fortnight in the cost of servicing that debt, because interest rates have hit their highest point since 2008. And while wages may have grown, they're not nearly as quickly as the cost of living. And even as wages have struggled to keep pace with inflation, Kiwis have been dragged into higher and higher tax brackets. And inflation has put families on a financial treadmill. And that running faster and faster, working longer hours, scrimping and saving, cutting a lot of the fun out of life just to keep up is what is a reality for many Kiwis across our country. But the faster they run, the more they feel that they're not getting ahead. And from a macroeconomic perspective, it's clear that the New Zealand economy is seriously unwell. Despite the rhetoric of global challenges, we are now the only country in the Asia-Pacific region in an economic recession. New Zealand has one of the largest current account deficits in the OECD, as you know, at 8.5% of GDP, meaning that more and more of what we buy offshore is going on the national credit card. And despite low unemployment, the Crown accounts are in deficit, and they're expected to remain in deficit for at least the next 2 years, and possibly even longer than that. And meanwhile, just across the ditch in Australia, their economy is growing, they have a current account surplus, and their books are in the black. So I don't accept the argument that our economic woes can be blamed on global factors. Clearly, the country has experienced tough times in recent years, but there have been bright spots, and I think those opportunities have been squandered. With unemployment at similarly low levels, Michael Cullen, Bill English and Stephen Joyce still ran surpluses. And that should be the dividend of a strong labour market. Kiwis in work, paying tax, not reliant on the state for support, And that's when a responsible government pays down debt and it builds the rainy day fund for tough times ahead. But sadly, that hasn't been the case over the last few years. Government spending, quite rightly, rose in response to COVID. But instead of falling as lockdowns ended and wage support measures became less intense, spending continued to climb, both in absolute terms and as a share of the economy. And incredibly, that spending this year will be $30 billion higher than in either 2020 or 2021 during COVID, and $60 billion higher than when Labor came into office. An extra $1 billion a week, 80% increase, and the question is, have we had an 80% increase in public services? Treasury is currently forecasting a larger deficit this year than in 2021, when the border was shut and periodic lockdowns drove billions of dollars of support payments. And I think it's one thing to be spending heavily in operating deficits as you revive an economy with high unemployment and stagnant inflation. But the decision to drive huge growth in spending and run large deficits, even after the pandemic has ended, will leave a major fiscal hangover for whoever inherits the books in October. Now, having depressed you, and despite all of those challenges, I do want to tell you that I am incredibly optimistic for the future of New Zealand, because I believe we have all the fundamentals and all the secrets for success that we need to do well in the world in the next 50 years. First up, we have fantastic people, talented, dedicated, determined, creative, innovative, that can foot it with anybody in the world. And I know I get to see that each and every week. I see Kiwis starting businesses, making contributions in their community, raising kids, raising families, and doing great work. And I think that's a great advantage for us. Secondly, we're bang smack in the middle of the Asia-Pacific region, the fastest growing part of the globe, with rapidly rising middle classes in Asia, the Americas, and Australia. And that creates huge opportunities for us with respect to trade and innovation and partnership that should bring for us. Those people want our great Kiwi products and services. And thirdly, we have the right institutions for growth. The rule of law, respect for human rights, a Westminster system free from corruption and democratic challenges that we see so often, a great liberal democracy. But despite those advantages, it is clear that the economy just still isn't firing on all cylinders. Now, in the short term, the major focus of my government will be to make sure we beat inflation. And National has a plan to do exactly that. We're going to rein in the wasteful spending. We will eliminate the bottlenecks in the economy that are frustrating growth. We're going to reduce the costs on businesses. We will deliver meaningful tax relief so that people keep more of their own money in their pocket and not give it to Chris Hipkins to waste. And we are going to return the Reserve Bank to a single focus on inflation. But once we've cleared the wreckage from the cost of living crisis, I think we're still going to find an economy that has not been living up to all the potential that it has. And that's an economy where Kiwis living and working in New Zealand earn 30% less than those that work in Brisbane or Sydney. It's an economy where young Kiwis don't come home from their OE because New Zealand just doesn't have the jobs, the wages, or the infrastructure, or the opportunities to keep up with the rest of the world. And I don't want a situation where young Kiwis receive an education here, leave offshore for their most productive years, only to return as they approach retirement. So I think it's time for a fresh approach. I think it's time for us to talk about how we get a growth mindset back into New Zealand and have a comprehensive plan to rebuild the economy. And I also believe that approach needs to be informed by a completely different way of working between government and the business sector, a relationship that I think should be based on genuine collaboration. I believe fundamentally that each of those parties, business and government, actually have unique but complementary roles. Government's got to get the settings right, and then it's got to get out of the way so that businesses can get on with what they do best: investing, taking a risk, employing staff, and lifting wages. But recently, I think we've seen a government that has been incredibly confused about its part in that partnership and in that equation. And I think that confusion is actually leading businesses astray. The government is so keen to intervene and to set new rules that I see a lot of major companies increasingly looking to Wellington for direction before they develop their own investment plans. And it's created, I believe, a parent-child relationship that is actually depressing the spark and innovation for which Kiwis have historically been famous. And that has to change. So I want to bring back a relationship between business and government that is an adult-to-adult relationship. I'm going to lead a government that genuinely listens, not as a risk management exercise or just to get CEOs off our back, but to actually understand from you what you need from us in order to compete harder on the world stage and to go faster. It will be a relationship where you feel comfortable demanding change to regulatory settings that are holding back growth. When we are the only country in the Asia-Pacific region in a recession, we do not have the luxury to turn off big parts of our economy. We have to grow. We have to get that growth mindset back in place again. But with that trust, I also expect you as business people to come to the table. I expect you to show up with your energy and your ideas, designed to take your businesses forward and the economy up another gear. And in return, I'll lead a government that will clear the blockages from the economy, allowing businesses to grow under its own steam. Now, I talk a lot about the economy, and I understand the dollars and the cents and the economics, but it's not about the economy for the economy's sake. It's about the people. It's about lifting incomes, creating new jobs, and being able to afford the public services that we also desperately want and deserve. It's actually about how we deliver better healthcare, an education system that equips our kids for success. And it's about the confidence, the ambition, the aspiration, and the hope that washes over the whole country when we have a vibrant, growing economy. The family's taking a risk on a small business. It's about the plucky startups going toe-to-toe with Silicon Valley companies in a bare bones office here in Auckland. And it's about the tradies who have a confidence to take on that extra apprentice or to buy that extra van to expand their business. So rebuilding the economy isn't just about the dollars and cents. It's actually about rebuilding a country where Kiwis believe that if they have hope, the ambition, aspiration, and the confidence to succeed, that they can actually go out there and achieve anything they want. And that's why I'm so passionate about wanting to rebuild the New Zealand economy. Because I know that Kiwis deserve a much better economy where it doesn't matter where you're from, it's all about where you're going to. And if you put in the work in the best country on planet Earth, you should be able to get ahead and do well for yourselves. So National's plan to rebuild and grow the economy, which will be released in full as we get closer to the election, will comprise essentially of 6 specific sets of changes to unleash that enterprise and deliver that economic growth that we so desperately deserve. The first is we're going to restore fiscal discipline. Secondly, we need to grow skills and attract talent. Thirdly, we need to drive technology and innovation. We need to build infrastructure for growth. Fifthly, we want to encourage trade and investment. And finally, we want to cut red tape. That's the overall plan, but the overarching goal is that we need to rediscover our mojo again. We need to hustle, we need to get ourselves positive, confident, ambitious, and aspirational, and we need to be growth-focused. And we need to actually make sure that we rebuild a culture of confidence and ambition. And my message to Kiwis is that if you play by the rules, government will get out of the way and we will let you thrive. Because we know that Kiwi ingenuity is actually what powers our economy, not the government. Government can enable growth, and that's what we should focus on, the enablers of growth, but we can't replace the optimism, the energy of Kiwis who have incredible ideas, committed to competing out there on the world stage. Now, in just the last 18 months, we've made already a series of major announcements as part of our plan to rebuild the New Zealand economy along the lines of those 6 strategic thrusts. And that is to restore fiscal discipline. We've announced that we'll make $400 million of savings from consultants and contractors, which has grown to $1.8 billion per year. So enjoy the last 58 days if you're a consultant out there. Make the most of it as you can, because time will be up shortly. But it's obvious to us that New Zealanders can use that money in a much better way than Wellington can. And that's why we've tagged those funds in particular to National's Family Boost policy, which is a childcare tax credit that will see families better off by $75 a week to support them with the cost of living. And we'll also soon be releasing our fully costed tax and fiscal plans, showing how we're going to rein in that wasteful spending and let Kiwis keep more of what they earn. Now, in growing skills and attracting talent, we've presented our Teaching the Basics Brilliantly plan, requiring primary schools to teach an hour of maths and reading and writing each and every single day. And we'll also give our parents information on how their children are progressing regularly. We have to build a world-class education system. That's so important to me. It's one of the things I've discovered in my 2 years in politics that has alarmed me the most. 40% of our kids today are not in school regularly. 75,000 are chronically absent from school. Half our kids show up at high school not ready to go in at the standard they need to be. Half our 15-year-olds failed the most basic maths reading and writing test. And when most of us went to school, we were in the top 10 countries on maths, reading and science in the world. And we're well out of that now. So we've got to rediscover that. We've got to build a world-class education system so we can get the skills in place to grow our economy. We also know that skill shortages have become a major challenge in the health sector, which is why we're going to introduce a new bonding program for graduate nurses, and we're also going to train hundreds of more doctors each and every year by expanding our places at our medical schools in Otago and Auckland and opening up a third medical school at the University of Waikato. And we're going to drive innovation, science and technology and innovation hard. We announced that we're going to end the ban on GMO. We're going to give farmers more choices to reduce their emissions and embrace technology and tools to do so while they continue to grow their businesses. And on infrastructure, we've made a series of major announcements. We're going to get more houses built by introducing Build for Growth payments, funding to councils so that they deliver the long-term housing growth so they can manage the cost of infrastructure that comes with that growth. And we're also going to replace the government's failed Three Waters reforms with our local water done well, which will maintain local water control of those assets in local hands, but will also ensure that the cost of that infrastructure that comes with growth is actually ensure there's a long-term investment plan in water infrastructure. And then just 2 weeks ago, we announced our Transport for the Future plan, which delivers 13 new roads of national significance and 4 major public transport projects so that Kiwis aren't losing productivity by being stuck in traffic. We're going to encourage trade and investment because as a small trading nation, we don't get rich selling stuff to each other. We have to go out there in a world of 195 countries and 8 billion people and thrive and build new connections and partnerships with the world. And we are going to cut red tape so that our businesses can get on with and grow under their own steam without constantly being dragged down by government and to have the certainty that they need to invest. And that's things like slashing consenting times for renewable energy and infrastructure, so that we can double the amount of clean, renewable electricity in New Zealand over the next few years. Our plan to get Wellington out of farming by making a raft of sensible regulatory changes designed to bring trust back to the relationship with rural communities on fresh water, winter grazing and resource management. But I'd say it's also critical that we kick investment into overdrive in New Zealand. And yes, New Zealand has skills shortages and we're committed to addressing them. But long term, it's absolutely essential that businesses can access the capital that they need to innovate, to grow, and to invest. And we need much more modern plant and equipment. We need more R&D and ultimately more capital flowing through and into New Zealand's fastest growing businesses so that we can take the economy up a gear and compete with some of the world's most productive countries. And we know that has to be the goal, because enabling that growth of those highly productive businesses, the cutting edge startups and the world beaters is exactly how we're going to lift wages for everyone and deliver the standard of living that everyone deserves. But in the current rules in the financial sector, they aren't delivering on that vision. And so often small businesses are actually dragged down by all of that red tape. They're dragged down by the rules that treat them like pariahs when they want something as simple as just an increase in the size of their overdraft. So that's why today I want to make a couple of small announcements on National's plan to cut financial red tape, to grow the pipeline of capital to New Zealand's businesses, and to deliver the investment we need to lift incomes for all. And first, I want to talk about KiwiSaver. KiwiSaver plays a really increasingly large role in the New Zealand investment environment as Kiwis are building their nest eggs and saving for their retirement. And we believe the settings are largely fit for purpose. But with some fund managers looking to actually diversify their investment offerings into startups and into infrastructure projects, we think it's important that all Kiwis can get in on that action. And the current settings require KiwiSavers to keep all of their savings with a single provider, limiting choice and ultimately worsening competition. And ultimately that means that Kiwis, unwilling to shift all of their savings to a different provider, are actually left on the sidelines of new investment opportunities. And that limits choices, and it limits competition, and it constrains growth. And ultimately, that means that smaller savings for Kiwis at retirement. And that's why we're going to end the requirement that KiwiSavers keep all of their savings with a single provider. With providers increasingly diversifying their offering, we think that savers should be able to get on some of those new offerings without putting all of their savings at risk with a single provider. And that change, as many of you will know in the room, was recommended as part of EY's capital markets review. And we think it's a sensible change to drive competition, to give savers more choice, and to support innovation in the sector. And there is nearly $100 billion now of capital built up in KiwiSaver, but we're not using it as effectively as possible. And so giving Kiwis the choice to spread their savings across multiple providers will ensure fast-growing companies looking to attract investment from KiwiSaver products providers will have more opportunities for investment. KiwiSaver can and it should play an important role in capitalising the New Zealand economy, to fueling that growth and innovation for the future. Now, National's also going to make some common sense regulatory changes to give Kiwis some more control over their own money. And first, it's very clear to us that the CCCFA changes passed 2 years ago have not proven fit for purpose. And while well-intentioned, in reality, those changes have just loaded costs and delays onto anyone looking to borrow even a small sum of money. And the changes have actually produced some real horror stories, like families being forced to justify their spending on cat food or Netflix, and empty nesters actually looking for a small extension on their mortgage to renovate the kitchen are often treated like they're borrowing millions of dollars. So the current rules have lost all relationship between risk and responsibility, and that has to change. So we're going to maintain the tight restrictions on predatory lenders, but we are going to narrow the scope of the remaining legislation, largely rolling back the government's recent changes to the CCCFA. The government can, and it should, play a role in protecting New Zealanders from predatory lending who take advantage of the most vulnerable in New Zealand. But the recent CCCFA changes perversely punish responsible lending, and it's been tying Kiwis up in hours of red tape when they want something just as simple as a mortgage extension. We're also going to fully roll back the government's conduct of financial institution changes, and that add more regulatory costs on lenders, but do actually very little to reduce risk in the financial sector. And I think it's a perfect example of the government's approach to regulation, which has been rules layered on top of rules with no regard for the cost on consumers or business, and no real focus on the problem that regulations are designed to solve. And instead of introducing new rules and new regulators, the focus should actually be on cleaning up the rules that we already have and enforcing those rules in a fair and predictable and certain way so consumers are protected and there is no genuine misconduct. Let me say, economies don't just grow by accident. They need careful management, and pruning back the barriers to investment and delivering the environment that businesses need to thrive is absolutely critical. We want world-class infrastructure. We need growing connections to new markets and new opportunities, and we need a pipeline of talent to fuel innovation for years to come. And getting those settings right means that we can deliver on the opportunities that Kiwis deserve, whatever they want to achieve. That's what we want, an opportunity society where Kiwis can go out, work hard and do well for themselves and feel that this is a place that they can do that in. And a government I lead is going to play a role. We're going to deliver a comprehensive plan to rebuild the economy, focused on those 6 critical sets of changes to unshackle businesses, to ensure that they can innovate, invest and grow. But I also expect business to play their role in New Zealand society too. Because I am confident if we give Kiwis a chance to thrive, we can build a growing, a dynamic, a competitive, an aspirational economy that beats inflation, lifts incomes and delivers the great public services that we can all rely on. I'm confident with that fresh approach that New Zealand has an incredibly bright and optimistic future ahead of it. And it's impossible not to be optimistic when you're lucky enough, as I said, when I get to see great innovation across the country every single week. But I tell you, there is an entrepreneurial spirit that ripples right across New Zealand, that drives new ideas, creates new businesses and new partnerships. And I just believe that if we can harness that energy, we can embrace the full potential of this great country of ours, and we can deliver on all the ambitions that we have and share that with our fellow citizens for our future. Thank you so much, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Have a seat, Chris. Wow, there's a bit to be talking about there, Chris. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Gosh, first question, easier to run an airline or run for government, do you think?
I'm loving it, actually. I mean, I guess the thing is, people ask me that question quite a bit, actually. You know, what have been the big changes coming from the commercial world into the political world? And Essentially it's been the same with a lot of my business experience. The National Party needed a turnaround first and foremost. The second thing I'd say to you is the country needs a turnaround, and some of the principles are actually very, very similar. Get really clear about the ends, get really the right team in place to deliver and hold them accountable for delivery, and then let's get some things done and get the show moving.
I want to talk to you a little bit about from a perspective of this room, which is I sense business very much feels like it's been frozen out of Wellington and possibly spoken to and not listened to.
Yeah.
What are you going to do to change that? Or is that your perception?
Yeah, look, when I was younger, I read a great book by one of my great heroes, a guy called Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl was one of the Holocaust survivors, but also quite a leading psychiatrist in the West. And he wrote a great book called Man's Search for Meaning. And in that was actually a commentary on Western civilization. And I took a lot out of that as a younger person because essentially he said in our society there are three actors in society. There is government that sets the riverbanks up and the rules and the enablers. There are businesses like you guys in this sector that can execute with great speed and scale and execute fast. And then there are community organisations and community that actually see the pain, the hurt, the need, the frustration out there. And I think that's the way we've got to reconceive of New Zealand, that there actually are three complementary but different actors in our society that actually have to work together on the challenges that we've got, but also the opportunities that we have. And I referenced it before, I didn't mean to sound too psychobabbly about it, but it has been a parent-child relationship, not an adult-to-adult one, because the number of boardrooms that I've sat in where the first question is, well, what do we think the government will think about this decision or this action? Well, actually, don't worry about that. Go build a kick-ass business, please, and focus on the consumer and building a great company and a great culture. And so I want us to really get clear on those roles of how we can work together. In the business sector, whether it's aged care, whether it's financial services, whether it's energy, we don't need an energy strategy coming from Wellington. We need that to come from the sector itself. That's where the brains are, that's where the thinking is, I'd like to work in a more Singaporean model, where the sector says, this is what we want to do to drive growth. It gets it about 60, 70% right. Then we come in and government say, well, how do we help you? Well, we do the enablers. If it's resource consenting, immigration settings, whatever it is to get that plan moving, let's do that and let's get the show on the road and going. On the community sector, it's a different challenge. I think we should take the money out of the centre and actually power up good community organisations that are getting outstanding outcomes. You and I have talked about it before, but mental health is something that's quite important to me. I'm going to have a dedicated Minister of Mental Health. But one of the observations was we supported the government on the investment in mental health, $1.9 billion. Then it was found that it never really got out of Wellington and made no difference to accessing services. But if you go talk to Mike King from Gumboot Friday, 19,000 counselling sessions helping 12,000 kids for $2.5 million. Every dollar you give Mike, he generates $8.30 of social benefit that we don't end up paying for in criminal justice or health or education things. And actually, so why don't we take the money and just double up his thing and buy outcomes through community organisations?
Yeah, it's along those lines of the social investment policy, I think, which Billing
very much so, and we're going to bring that from theory into practice, and I've asked Nicola Willis to lead that along with finance so we can actually get that done.
I want to lean a little bit to what you're announcing with KiwiSaver. I think a bit of a litmus test to be able to diversify your KiwiSaver is a good option. I'm thinking about how it's administered, though, and I'm wondering whether you're going to need a few more of those consultants.
Yeah. Some of them in the room are thinking of repurposing, are they? Yeah. Look, no, I don't think we will. I mean, Andrew's done some good thinking around this, and I think our view is that the complexity associated with managing that, we can work with the IRD through that, for example. I think realistically it'd probably be capped at 2 or 3 providers, maybe. But again, the point is that we know there is KiwiSaver funds that want to go do, for example, build-to-rent products in New Zealand. We know that we are very determined with a big infrastructure deficit. We think there's $10 billion worth of projects that we actually need to actually fund through pension funds here in New Zealand or even overseas pension funds so that we can actually catch up on the deficit that we've got. And so all we're trying to do is give KiwiSaver investors the opportunity to participate in some more different types of products from different providers. And I think that's just natural with the evolution of KiwiSaver and the maturity versus what I experienced living in the States for 8 years or what I see in Australia where I lived for 5 years. I think we're just at that point of maturing.
Rolling back some of those, the regulation around credits that you've just spoken about.
Been a nightmare.
So I can hear right now what Labor will say to that. They'll say you're going to get more, South Canterbury Finance, you're going to fuel loan sharks.
No, it's rubbish. Yeah, it's rubbish. I mean, first and foremost, I don't take many lectures from the Labor Party on economics, not being no disrespect. But what I'd say to you is, that triple CFA was a drafting nightmare because essentially the government dreams it all up in Wellington, and then it throws it over the fence to the business sector, and everyone within a matter of months knew that it was unworkable because it ended up capturing a whole bunch of folk that were trying to finance mortgages for houses.
Could it have been improved maybe rather than thrown out?
Well, we did offer to do that. Andrew and I went to the government and said, look, you've really drafted this thing really badly and it's having unintended consequences, and as a result, why don't we go in next week and actually bipartisanly make a change so we don't capture banks, for example, and non-banks, and actually focus on the predatory lenders, which is where there is a genuine problem. But again, what I observe in government in 2 years in politics is that you've got all this solution and ideology that goes roaming around and looking for a problem to attach to. But in my old world, you define the problem really clearly, and then you put common sense, pragmatic, practical solutions to deal with the problem. It's a poor problem definition in government.
When I talk about industry, sector, business feeling frozen out of Wellington, I'm going to ask you about whether you have spoken to business about some of what you've announced today, about whether it's feasible to be able to split KiwiSaver, about whether it's the right thing to do to roll back some of these regulations.
Yeah, look, we have. One of the measures I put in place when I first became leader of the National Party was that I wanted all of my spokespeople. I have 6 monthly performance reviews, which is a new concept in government. But basically one of those things is I measure their success by how much they are out of those wood-panelled offices in Wellington and actually engaging with the sector. And someone like Andrew Bailey and Nicola Willis have done a fantastic job of getting around the business community and actually understanding the constraints on the triple CFA stuff. But we also hear those stories every day. I was in Paraparaumu last night at a public meeting, and people coming up and talking about how hard it was to get finance as a first home buyer for a new mortgage because of the triple CFA, essentially. Developers, small developers that are falling over because of that issue as well. And then on the KiwiSaver front, well, it's been a recommendation from that capital markets review.
Is this enough on KiwiSaver? If we need KiwiSaver to be, matching right up there with what, is going on in Australia, and there's a bit of tinkering. Not a lot of love in this room, I have to say, for the bond, that you can access your bond for your tenancy. Having a rethink on that at all?
No, look, I appreciate it. Look, it's quite a small policy in many regards. It's just acknowledging that we have some young people that don't have the bank of mum and dad at home. They're off to university. They may be people like me who, first in my family ever to go to university, and, they may or may not have the family support, and as a consequence, their rental accommodation is a major, particularly that first bond. We've capped it for a period of time and for an age, and we're just acknowledging it goes from their KiwiSaver account. I appreciate that does, it's not forever, but we want them back in the KiwiSaver so that we can actually get the compounding value of the growth of those funds.
Getting a lot of headlines at the moment, Chris, about overseas buyers. You're going to open that up again?
Yeah, we'll have more to say about it shortly. I know the government wants to try and come at us on a range of issues, but I guess what I'd just say, if you just zoom out a little bit, is New Zealand is the most restrictive country for foreign direct investment in the developed world. And the one that's next after us is actually Mexico, and we're still well ahead of them by a long way. So one of the challenges that we've had in New Zealand is that it's about this capital thing. And what we want to do is catalyse and unlock and use the capital that already exists in the $100 billion of KiwiSaver funds here in New Zealand. But if you think about it, there's $11 trillion worth of sovereign wealth funds around the world. There's $53 trillion worth of pension funds in the top 22 markets of the world. And the world is awash with cash. And we have not been welcoming to capital to New Zealand. And so the contrast, I've been studying small advanced economies for the last 15 years, and I've looked at Ireland a lot. Well, if you were to go and invest a European operation in Ireland, you'd say, I've got $50 to $100 million to do it. It's a completely different experience. You show up there and you go, hi, I'm from New Zealand, I've got my pet food company, I want to launch it into Europe or whatever. They go, thank you, Rachel, for coming, we're really grateful you came. Here's some land that's already resource consented, you can build your new head office here. Here's a floor in a building that's already available, and you can take off on one of those. And here are 5 people that you need to know in your sector that actually are related to what you do. And I'm your customer account manager, and if there's any problems, you just call me. Now, that's a very different experience from the New Zealand experience for companies that I've spoken to, large tech companies, big investors,
I think the Irish, though, the public would say, though, that a lot of those earnings, a lot of that revenue, a lot of the goodness, the tax and whatever goes out of that country.
Well, I just tell you, Ireland used to be 3/4 as wealthy as New Zealand. Now it's twice as wealthy for 5 million people. And I wouldn't mind having twice the number of GPs, and I wouldn't mind having twice the number of teachers. And they can do that because they've got an economy that affords it. And they've also invested in education, driven into technology in a big way, and as a result made their country wealthier.
In terms of opening up to foreign buyers or foreign investors, we have a housing shortage. We're what are we pumping in? About $1 million a day into areas like Rotorua to keep people in motels?
$1 million on emergency housing. Yep.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. Can we afford necessarily to be opening up the borders then?
Look, we're going to we'll have more to say about it. It's a broader conversation about saying, how do you get the economy growing? Yes, there's education, infrastructure, skills, red tape, international connections, foreign investment and overseas investment is a piece of that. We'll make sure that we get the balance right between protecting New Zealand's interests but also having access to capital.
What I would say from being around a few governments and opposition parties over the years, very, very easy to promise the world in opposition.
Yeah.
Very challenging to deliver in government. And I think we've seen some of those challenges play out recently. And John Key, I'm sure, would agree with that. How do we believe you? Why do we believe you? You haven't been in government before and you're promising us the world.
Yeah, well, look, I don't make promises that I don't follow through and deliver on. And I think, we don't hit this with deep ideology or political ideology. What we're actually saying is, again, what are the problems that we have in New Zealand? And let's be clear, it's around inflation and cost of living and about economic growth. It's about law and order. It's been about health and education. They are the 4 big things that New Zealanders are concerned about and we keep talking about, but we don't seem to solve. I mean, this government's been incredible to me. I mean, it's a very unique and special skill set that they have to actually spend 80% more money on government spending, the second biggest government spending per capita country on earth, to actually hire 14,000 more bureaucrats plus the 2,000 more consultants and actually deliver worse outcomes on health, education, crime and the economy. It's a special skill set. I don't know how you do that.
You've got 3 years to turn that around.
Yep.
We've got youth crime, we've got youth offending,
but
we've
I think
got kids not in school.
But the problem has been, to be honest, Rachel, a lot of it's about outcomes. And it's unique in government that they measure success by how much money is spent rather than the outcomes that are delivered.
How are you going to change that?
Well, we're going to make sure that we have better public service targets, well delivered and frames that everyone's clear about what they're doing. I want everyone walking into the Ministry of Health today to know that their job is to get emergency wait times down so we're not 30% of us waiting more than 6 hours, but it's 10%. They need to know that there's got to be less than 1,000 people waiting for 4 months to see their first specialist, not 53,000 as there is today. So when you've got targets and you've got metrics and you distinguish outcomes from inputs, that's where the focus has to go. And so you're remunerating CEOs on that, making sure that we make that very clear and transparent to all. I think you'll start to see that's the way, the how we've got to get things done.
When you talk about that with the health system, I go, yep, that sounds great. But in there, you've also got the Māori Health Authority. You've got my good friends at Pharmac. You're in a silo. You've got the Ministry of Health, pretty dysfunctional there. What's going on with Te Whatu Ora as well? To even get to the stage where you go, would you address wait times? There are layers that, you've got 200 comms consultants in there as well.
Yep.
How long does it take to unravel a system that hasn't even really started to ravel itself up yet?
Yeah, look, I fully agree. I think health is actually probably the most challenging and complex one to sort through because even if the country was 4 times wealthier, we would still not have enough resources. We'd still want more health outcomes, right, and higher health outcomes, and we'd never get there. So I think on health, it is a big one, and you've sort of got to, like most turnaround jobs, really work your way through it. I think there's 3 big things. There has been $500 million just spent on restructuring those imperfect DHBs into Health New Zealand. They've then created a separate Māori Health Authority, which will scrap. It's created a huge bureaucracy, and it has just not delivered any improved outcomes in health over 6 years at all. You've got to have targets, because actually targets save lives, and you've got to make sure everyone's focused on that's what we're here to do. And then we've got to build the workforce, because we actually, I think, have about 30% of our health workforce about to retire in the next 7 years. So it's about homegrown talent, like bonding those nurses. It's about opening up medical schools and doing that, but also getting our immigration settings right. I found it perverse to sit there and say, all of last year we have 4,500 nurses short, and the government refused to put nurses on the green list for a period of time. And it's just, I don't know, it's just ideological and arrogance.
You've got a chunk of, I am supposed to be taking questions. I'm not sure whether my iPad could be user error, I have to say, for questions coming through. But you've got a chunk of health insurers in this room.
Yep.
We do have some examples of good private-public partnerships. What would you say to the health insurers in the room?
Oh, continue to get creative and innovative about it. I mean, you and I have both seen it, actually. I spent a day with Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, and they've done an incredible job with NIB, for example, actually building out healthcare products and solutions for their local iwi. And that's a great example of innovation on the edges. And I know Southern Cross has done similar things with other community groups as well. So, my ask is, let's, you think about it, get creative, let's actually get involved with it and actually build new products and new ways to solve the problems we've got.
Some quick fire questions for you. Migration, concerned about it? A lot of people leaving?
Really concerned. We had 34,000 Kiwi citizens leave New Zealand in the last year.
Is that just post-COVID though? A lot of young people heading overseas?
I mean, we've been through these phases before, but what I'm really conscious of, I'm a dad of a 23 and a 21-year-old, and you just want to make sure that, and I left overseas, I was overseas for 16 years in Sydney, London, Chicago, Toronto, New York, but we want to make sure we're building a country that is a place that's compelling for our kids to want to stay in, start a business, make a contribution to the community, raise family. And a lot of that gets you back to, well, let's make sure the education system works. Let's make sure that healthcare systems, when it needs to be there, it's there for them, that the crime is under control and not out of control.
Let's talk about China.
Yep.
How do you balance the two superpowers between the China and States? Both really important relationships?
Both really important relationships. China's one we've had a long-standing relationship over 50 years for now. It's based off mutual respect. We will have areas of common interest where we'll collaborate very strongly, and we'll also have areas of difference where we need to stand up for values that we believe in. I think China's in quite a challenged place personally. Yeah. I think when you look at what's happening in their property market and look at what's happening in their broader economy, you're seeing some real challenges there. And you're seeing that actually manifest itself here in New Zealand with respect to dairy prices that fell 7.5% the night before last, and it will cause some pain. And you've also got, then they've got a demographic problem, frankly, about the mid-century as well, which will start to make them more like a middle power economy that actually has got sluggish growth and can't quite get there. So I think we need to diversify as well as do the business in China. It's not to say we shouldn't do business in China. We should definitely do that and expand opportunities there. But I would love to see New Zealand businesses build their fluency and literacy in places like Indonesia, Southeast Asia, India, UK, Europe, and ultimately the US as well.
Okay, just quickly, Winston. What do you do about a problem like Winston?
Well, I mean, yeah. Well,
X says no, won't work with him. Labour won't work with Winston.
My message really simple is, in an MMP environment, I don't need anybody trying to help us or be strategic by giving support to minor parties. What I need New Zealanders to understand, and remember, 2 and a bit years ago, every electorate in this country voted for the Labour Party, except for Epsom, voted for National. But otherwise, everyone gave their party vote to Labour, and as a result, we ended up in the situation we ended up in. And so democracy is important, your vote's important, MMP environment people need to understand, and it all comes down to party vote. So my only thing is, if you want to change the government, the guaranteed way to do it is party vote National, and we'll deal with what we've got to deal with on the other side in coalition. Talk
a bit to John Key still?
Yeah, I mean, John and Brona are good friends of a matter of mine, so we don't always talk politics in great depth, but really? we do from time to time, but I mean, we have a lot of fun, and we tend to do movie and dinner nights. So one of us brings the food and one of us selects the movie, and we do it at each other's houses, most Saturday nights or every when we're around in town. So last movie was Bullet Train and sushi. That's about it. So, but no, John's a good friend. I got to know him well, obviously, when I was at Air New Zealand, and we've become good mates. Yep. Great. We've got morning tea to go to, and you've got the media. Awesome. But thank you guys so much, Chris. Thanks so much. Thanks, Rachel. And thanks for what you guys do too. Appreciate it. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Chris and Rachel. I know Chris is going out to his media doorstep, which is out to the right for the media, but I'd like to welcome Peter Forster, who's the General Manager of Wealth from BNZ, to thanks Chris.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Chris, on behalf of the FSC board and I think everybody in the room, thanks very much for taking time out of your very incredibly hectic schedule at the moment to come and share some of your vision for New Zealand and from a policy perspective how you plan to get there. The vision of the FSC is to grow the financial confidence and well-being of New Zealanders. And to do this requires government and business to work together on policy. And so it was heartening to hear you talk about that sort of relationship between business and government.
Wouldn't it be great if we got the banks to finance a financial literacy program for us in this country? Is that what you're offering?
We'll take that. We'll take that offline, I think.
Yeah, let's pick that up.
We'll take that offline. But from an FSC perspective, we've had a lot of engagement. We've been very thankful for the engagement we've had with your colleagues in the opposition. Brilliant. We've had great engagement, obviously from Andrew, from Nicola as well. And should you be successful in forming a government in October, we look forward to continuing to work with you on policy and ultimately on growing New Zealand and helping all the communities in New Zealand prosper. So thanks again.
Awesome.
Kia ora.
Thanks so much, mate. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Well done.